Today we're installing doors in the studio. You might notice there's already a door installed. That's a door that I built, but it didn't quite work out as well as I'd hoped. So it's got to come out and be replaced by a pre-hung door that I purchased. Let's dive in. The door I'm removing is made of high-end maple veneer plywood, which both looks great and is very heavy. I was experimenting a bit because I couldn't find any solid core doors in my area that were made of solid wood, so I thought, why not create one from scratch? I used 2 layers of 3/4 inch plywood and first glued, then screwed them together and left it to sit overnight. Some of you that are more experienced with woodworking will be shaking your heads knowing that I'm about to reveal that the plywood warped after a few days. This was devastating at the time because this plywood isn't cheap and I thought I might have to throw it away. Fortunately, I was able to repurpose it for a desk in one of my boys' rooms. If you're wondering why I even attempted making a door with plywood, here's some climbing equipment my kids use that's made of 2 layers of plywood. It's perfectly straight and we've had it for more than 2 years. I tried bending the door back with clamps and left it sitting for 2 weeks to see if it would change shape at all. It didn't budge, which makes me wonder if I could have been successful with the door if I had clamped it flat before installing it. Maybe if it was clamped while acclimatizing, it could have stayed straight. If any of you have experience with this type of thing, please share your thoughts in the comments. Let's back up a bit further and review options for a soundproof door. I initially got 2 quotes for a door from companies that build proper sound isolating doors. The first one started at $5,000 and the second at $10,000. That was the basic configuration, and if you wanted to customize or add any windows, the price went up from there. Wilson at Soundproof Your Studio recently shared his recommendations for purchasing soundproof doors, and he was able to find some better prices. I'll link that video below. Overall, the main strategy for soundproofing is to make the door as heavy as possible. The heavier the door, the better it will block sound from passing through. In the end, I chose to use 2 prefabricated solid core doors, each weighing approximately 55 pounds. These were pre-hung doors, which simplified the installation. If I were to do it again, I would add a layer of MDF or plywood to increase the weight of the doors. In that case, I would need to choose my own heavy-duty hinges and custom build a 5/4 inch thick door frame. The doors I bought came pre-hung, so I didn't want to add any weight and compromise the hinges or frame. There's also some math I did to check the weight of the doors against the weight of the walls. The door is a weak point in soundproofing because it will be opening and closing constantly. There's also no insulation, which you have between the double stud walls. You have to be careful to use weatherproofing around the whole door and check for any gaps. The quality of the seals will make or break your soundproofing. A good strategy is for the doors to be heavier than the walls per square foot. In my case, the doors are approximately the same weight per square foot as the inside walls, and they are heavier than the outside walls. I will have been building this studio for close to 2 years by the time it's finished, and there are some things like this that I chose not to push the extra mile on. As you'll see at the end of this video, the results are still quite good. Once I got the prefabricated doors, the installation was relatively simple. I had to add a piece of 3/4 inch pine to get the right opening size versus the original plywood door. Then I went through the shimming and leveling process to get the door sitting properly. It's important to fill any cavities around the frame with rock wool and then use acoustic sealant over top. I got this strategy from Gervais' book, Home Recording Studio Build It Like the Pros, and I recommend getting this book if you're building a studio of your own. One thing I did differently from Rod's approach was having no solid connection between the 2 doors. In his book, Rod recommends a continuous frame that attaches to both wall assemblies. Rod recommends this for strength reasons, but my doors are lighter than what he recommends. I've also gone to great lengths to ensure there's no rigid connections between the studio and the rest of the house. You may have seen in my previous videos that I use Sonus clips for the ceiling and DE90 clips for the walls. To cover the opening, I added rock wool and then fabric. I used white fabric, which will easily get dirty, but I'm choosing to maintain the white aesthetic, and I have some extra from the fabric I'll be using for acoustic panels. The fabric is slightly see-through, so I found that a single layer looked too dark with the insulation behind it. I used some white tape underneath to see if that would help it look more white. This wasn't perfect, but it worked well enough. The bottom door frame and stops were a bit challenging because of the slope of the floor. I had to sand the pieces and fit them to size, which took a few hours. It's important to air seal every portion of the door, including the door stops. Here's what it looks like before and after caulking. I use standard caulking rather than acoustic sealant because the acoustic sealant available in my area remains flexible and tacky. It's very messy stuff. I used crack-proof caulking, which works well for applications that might flex slightly over time. Lastly, I used freezer door handles rather than standard door handles. I got this idea from Wiesna over at True Sound Studios. He has an excellent build series where he built a control room and a live room in a garage, and I'll link that series in the description. A freezer door handle achieves better sound isolation than standard door handles because the hole in the door is so much smaller. This is made possible by having the handle assembly sit on the outside of the door. I had to add a piece of trim underneath the handle to get it sitting at the right depth for the latch. When installing the door stops, I discovered it's helpful to do the weather stripping and sealing at the same time. What I did was attach the weather stripping to the door stop before attaching it to the door frame. This makes it possible to adjust based on the exact contour of the door. You have to be careful to avoid gaps between the weather stripping and the door. I used heavy-duty weather stripping. This stuff is thick and wasn't as flexible as I was hoping. It was awkward lining up the door stops. I was able to make it work, but I would recommend finding a more flexible weather stripping. You also want to avoid pushing the door stop too far, causing the door to flex. Notice that the door stops are adjusted slightly because the goal is continuous contact between the door and weather stripping. Now that the doors are assembled, here's a quick sound test showing how well these doors isolate sound.